Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the new series of videos on Rome's Eternal Decline channel. These are videos that are related to the new book that I have coming out in October, The Romans, A 2,000-Year History. And I am posting these videos now, especially because the press is offering a discount code that will allow you to get 20% off the price of the book if you purchase it at basicbooks.com before October 7th of 2025. So I'm doing these videos both to introduce the project and then also to be sure that those of you who are interested in getting the book at a discount have the opportunity to do that. So this is the second of those videos. The first one that was posted just a little while ago introduced the project and talked a little bit about what I was trying to do in it. What I want to do today is actually shift our focus a little bit and look particularly at how this goal of telling the story of Rome without chronological division so we can understand the better flow of things, what this did in the conversations that I've had with other people to generate really good questions about how to think about Rome, how to think about this continuity of the ancient parts of Roman history with the medieval and nearly early modern parts of Roman history. And I want to address some of those very basic questions in this video because I think they're great questions. And they're definitely worth spending some time talking about just to help understand where I was trying to do, what I was trying to do with the book and where I was trying to take it. So the backstory to this is, I started the book right when I finished The Eternal Decline and Fall of Rome, the book for which this channel is named. And it took almost 5 years of work. And in that time, I had lots and lots of great conversations with people and lots of time to think about how some of the questions they raised would work in adapting and causing me to rethink some of the things that I was doing in the book. And so I wanted today just look at some of those best questions that were raised and try to answer them because I think some of those questions have a kind of universal resonance that I think are really great for us to talk about. So here are some of the best questions. The first question, pretty basic question, is who are the Romans? Um, on one level, this seems like a really simple question, and on another level, this is an extremely complicated question. Because, as I mentioned, the book starts in the 8th century BC. And in the 8th century BC, the people that we are talking about as Romans are a group of people living probably on the Palatine and maybe the Capitoline Hill in the city of Rome. It's a very, very small group of people. We don't have anything that they have written because they didn't have a written language. We have very, very scarce and very limited material evidence of what they're doing. But it is clear that these people are a group of people that are connected intellectually and connected culturally and institutionally with those same people in 1204 AD living in Constantinople who are Christians. And so, what is it that we can do to unify those people? Well, I think, we can create all kinds of artificial categories. Do they live under Roman law? Well, that's hard to say because what are they living under in the 8th century BC? Do they have the same religion? No, they don't. Do they speak the same language? No, they don't. And so, how are all of these people across 2,000 years Romans? Well, the one thing that they share in common with each other is they say they're Romans. And so, the idea that I'm using across the book is basically if somebody says they're Roman, we need to take them seriously. And I think on one level, this makes the task of writing the book somewhat easier because I don't have to interrogate, is this person Roman or are they not? But on another level, I think it's way more honest and intellectually fair to take somebody at their word when they say they are who they, when we accept that they know who they are, even if we can't quite understand it. So on a very basic level, if somebody living in the 8th century AD or the 6th century BC says they're Roman, and I can't quite understand why they're saying it, that's my problem. That's not their problem. Um, I need to understand better why they think they're Roman. I cannot exclude this identification that they make because they frankly know more about their world and they frankly know more about themselves than I do. And so it's not right or fair for me to pass judgment about their identity. If they tell me they're Roman, then I'm going to believe they're Roman and I'm going to treat them like that. And I'm going to do my best to understand why that's the case. And so, who are the Romans? It's a great question, but it's one I think that we can solve on some level quite easily. The Romans are the people who say they're Romans. And if they say they're Romans, we need to understand why they say it. And we need to write a narrative that incorporates them as Romans without passing judgment on a claim that we, frankly, would be very upset if somebody were doing to us. So Romans are who Romans are. If they say they're Roman, and that's the unifying strand of the book. So if I'm so interested in asserting and claiming, and I'm thinking about Roman people on the terms that they assert, why am I not writing a history of the Roman people? Also, a great question. This is a history of the Roman state and not the Roman people for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason is I think with the Roman state, we have a unit that we can more or less trace. It has a set of boundaries that we can understand because it starts at some point, it evolves over time, and then it ends. But the Roman people don't really end. And this is where things become particularly challenging because the Roman people outlast the Roman state by a significant amount of time. So the Roman state, as I talk about it, ends in 1204 AD. There are Roman successor states that come up after that that last into the 15th century, but the Roman people don't disappear when those states disappear. Under the Ottoman Sultanate, there are plenty of people who identify as Romans. When the Ottoman Sultanate starts losing control of territories in the Aegean and the Balkans, there are plenty of people who identify as Romans. Many of them are people that we would now identify as Greeks, but they don't call themselves Greeks. They call themselves Romans. And there are even really famous accounts of when the modern Greek nation comes and takes control of islands in the Aegean in the 1940s, the people who are speaking Greek living in those islands still self identify as Romans. And there's a story that someone once told me about living in one of those communities and running down to the harbor to see the arrival of the Greeks because the young child who was running down to the harbor to see them, he was Roman. And the people coming from the modern Greek state to take possession of his island, they are Greeks. And so writing a history of the Roman people is something very different from the history of the Roman state because frankly, there is quite a bit of history of Roman people that extends long, long after those people lose their independent states. And so frankly, I did not have the space to write that book, but I do hope someone will, because the history of the Roman people from the 8th century BC until the 20th century AD would be a really wonderful thing, but it would be very different from a history of the Roman state. So then what is the Roman state? Well, so here I think we have a great definition that's provided by people in antiquity. So this is a definition that Cicero gives us. Cicero says a republic or res publica is the property of the people. A people is not a collection of humans assembled in any old way, but a collection of a multitude joined to one another by a consensus about law and the common good. So this is a passage, I mean, if you have watched a lot of things on this channel or you've seen me do presentations in other contexts, this is a passage that I love because I think every single word of it is very carefully framed and also exactly right. What Cicero is saying is the Roman state, the res publica, is basically a corporation, a political corporation owned by its citizens. And those citizens are joined together by two things: a consensus about what's good and a consensus about what's legal. And so the state is the property of those people, and the state behaves in a fashion that is completely consistent with the consensus that those people reach about what is lawful and what is good. And so Cicero is describing the Roman Republic. But aside from a very few controversial moments in Roman history, the idea of the state as something that belongs to its citizens applied to Rome across its entire history. And I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive just to show you how I think that's true. So the Roman monarchy, which starts sometime around 753 BC and lasts until 509 BC, is something where you do see the monarchs being accountable to the citizen stakeholders of the Roman state. So the early Roman kings are selected by patricians, the hereditary aristocracy in Rome, but the choice the patricians make is then approved by a vote of non-patricians, the plebeians. And the kings are then accountable to both the patricians and the plebeians because they are the stakeholders in the state. Now, the second to last Roman king, Servius Tullius, did sideline patricians in that process. But what Servius Tullius did is he created an assembly, and he was accountable to that assembly. And so it's a modification of this idea, but it's not something where he says, in essence, I own the state. The state is my possession. This is not a Louis XIV, l'état c'est moi kind of moment. This is instead a change in the way that accountability is demonstrated. Now, the final king, Tarquinius Superbus, did move away from something that was a state that was governed by, the accountability the king had to the stakeholders and the citizens. But this didn't last. It ultimately led to a revolution that led to the change of the monarchy to the Roman Republic. And the Republic is what Cicero is actually describing, but the Republic is not one fixed thing either. And if you're interested in this, there's a great book by Harriet Flower called The Roman Republics that actually traces the way that this evolves. But the evolution of the Republic is an evolution in, again, how the state is accountable to the citizens who are its stakeholders. So the earliest republic was patrician dominated, with only patricians able to hold the highest offices, but non-patricians, the plebeians, they pushed back, they negotiated peacefully, and over more than 2 centuries, they remade how that state worked so that patricians and influential non-patricians shared power. And then, as Roman citizenship expanded, new people from Italy and from communities farther away from Rome entered into this patrician plebeian ruling elite and eventually won highest offices to the state. And, most notably, the person who gives us this definition, Cicero, is actually one of these people. He's from an Italian noble family. He's not from the traditional Roman nobility, but he was elected consul in 63. And then with the empire, we again see something where the constitution evolves, but the early emperors in the empire are really careful to make it clear that, again, this idea of citizen stakeholders remains valid and it remains the source of their authority. And so from Augustus on, emperors acknowledged that they are governed by laws, and that their immense power and resources gave them the ability to perform tasks as magistrates, but they did not own the state. It was not theirs to possess. It was not theirs to give to their heirs. The state still belonged to its citizens. And we even have some really remarkable things that are said by some of these emperors. In 429 AD, the emperors Theodosius II and Valentinian III wrote that a reigning sovereign must be subject to the laws because our authority is dependent upon the law. And it's only by accepting that the laws apply to every Roman, including the emperors, that we are able to forbid others to do what we do not suffer ourselves to do. So this is a long way of saying that even under the empire, this notion that citizenship mattered, that citizenship ultimately was the thing that made one a stakeholder in the Roman state. This is something that really vitally applied not only in the Republic, but also to the monarchy and to the empire. And this is a coin issued by Valentinian III and Theodosius II. It's a little bit after this law. It's, I think, from the later part of the 430s instead of 429. But this coin is remarkable because you see Theodosius and Valentinian sitting together on a throne, and the legend of the coin says Salus Rei Publicae. Again, that idea of republic that Cicero is talking about. And these emperors advertise themselves as the protectors of the health and the salvation of this publicly held Roman corporation that doesn't belong to its emperors, but belongs to its citizens. And so it's true that the Roman state never really totally lived up to Cicero's idea, but it is always trying because its citizens are always trying to make it so. So when did this thing begin? So did it really begin on April 21st of 753 BC, as Roman tradition says? Probably not. um, we don't know for sure. It's really hard to say. But it is clear that by the time our historical sources become reliable, the state is has been there for a long time. It has robust institutions. It is really functioning quite well. I think that we start getting evidence that is, I think, plausible narrative evidence for what's happening in Rome, really in the reign of Servius Tullius or maybe a little bit before. So, really in the 6th century BC. So, can we go back to the 8th century BC and say anything with conviction about how that state looked? No. But can we say that there's something going on there in the 8th century BC? I think we can. And this is because on places like the south slope of the Palatine Hill, excavations have found locations where post holes were dug into the bedrock that correspond basically to 8th century settlements. And we also have these things. So on the right of the slide, you can see there's a little hut. This comes from a type of burial called the Cultura Laziali burials. And the Cultura Laziali burials are really interesting because in the area around Rome, these burials have the remains of the person who's being buried placed in something that is a hut. And if you look at the way that these huts are reconstructed in these burials, they more or less allow you to look at these post holes and say, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking at, is a house that is similar to what we see represented in these huts. So the 8th century BC is probably when you start having habitation on the Palatine in a sort of organized fashion. And so these political institutions that we see as particularly well developed in the early part of the 6th century BC probably have their root and their origin in whatever was going on in the 8th century BC. We don't have sources that say for sure, but I don't think the dating is off. And if Romans are telling us that their city was founded on April 21st of 753 BC, I don't know that we need to accept the day or the year, but I think the century is probably about right. And so I'm comfortable starting there. So if we're starting in the 8th century BC, why do I end in 1204 AD? Especially because after 1204 AD, there are still Roman states in Epirus, in Western Greece, in Trebizond, in what's now kind of Eastern Turkey, and in Nicaea, which is a city that is, a couple hundred miles or so from Constantinople. So there are still Roman states after the Crusader capture of Constantinople in 1204. This image is an image of the Crusader capture of Constantinople in 1204. It obviously didn't look exactly like that, but it's a great representation, great suggestive representation. So I think the Romans themselves answer that question of why 1204. And part of this has to do with some very specific things that are related to how the Crusaders come to take the city of Constantinople and what follows after they do take the city of Constantinople. So the Fourth Crusade begins getting the idea that they might want to come and attack Constantinople in the end of 1202. And the backstory to this is something I go through a lot in the book. I don't really want to spend a ton of time going through it right now, but basically, the Fourth Crusade was supposed to be a naval crusade, and the soldiers of the Fourth Crusade did not have the money that they needed to pay the Venetians the amount that they had contracted to pay the Venetians for the ships. And so they go on a set of basically adventures in which they sack and capture territory to try to get enough money to pay the Venetians. And in late 1202, it becomes clear to the Crusaders that Constantinople and an attack on the Roman Empire based in Constantinople might be a way that they can get the money that they need. And as news of this reaches Constantinople, the Roman Emperor Alexius III writes a letter to the Pope, and he explains to the Pope that the Pope should forbid the Crusaders from attacking Constantinople because the Crusaders were using as a pretext the fact that a son of a deposed Roman emperor was available for them to take to Constantinople, and because his father was a deposed emperor, the son had the right to the Roman throne. What Alexius III writes to the Pope is he says, in essence, this is a Western way of thinking. This is not a Roman way of thinking. The Roman throne, Alexius tells the Pope, should not pass to this son of a deposed emperor for any reason, because the Roman throne is not conferred through hereditary succession, but through the election of the nobles. And so this goes back to that very, very basic idea of the Roman state belongs to its citizens. The nobles are the representatives of Rome's citizenry. And those nobles are the people who confer legitimacy on a sovereign, because ultimately, what is the sovereign? The sovereign is not the owner of the Roman state. The sovereign is entrusted with managing the Roman state. And so this is emphasized to the Pope because what the emperor is trying to say is the Roman state works differently from monarchies in Western Europe or even in the Middle East. The Roman state is not a monarchy. What the emperor holds is a magistracy that the emperor holds for as long as the people who entrusted it to him want him to hold it. And so this idea helps explain what happens after the fall of Constantinople and why I think after Constantinople falls in 1204, the Roman state no longer is the same state as the thing founded in the 8th century BC in Italy. So after Constantinople falls, the Crusaders take the city. Um, when they take the city, they divide the city into fiefdoms, or they divide the empire into fiefdoms. So again, in the book, I go through. There's a lot of sort of intermediate steps between 1202 and 1204, including a temporary regime set up by the pretender the Crusaders want to put in place. But ultimately, the Crusaders end up attacking and capturing Constantinople and deciding that instead of working through pretenders, they're just going to carve the territory up themselves. And so they do this in a way that's very consistent with how, say, Normans would have done things when they conquered territory in, like, say, southern Italy. Every notable gets a piece of that territory, and then they set out from Constantinople to take it over. And the Crusaders appoint an emperor who is in charge of Constantinople. This is not done in coordination with the Roman nobles. This is not the choice of a Roman emperor. And the Crusaders are very deliberate about that. They are not going to follow the procedures that the Romans used to select their own emperors because to them, there is no such thing as a state that belongs to its citizens. The state belongs to the people in charge of it. And so they have no interest in getting legitimacy from the citizens of the Roman Empire. And so the state they create in Constantinople is very clearly different from the Roman state. So what about these successor states, these states in Epirus and Nicaea and Trebizond? Well, the Roman nobles who have the authority to appoint the emperor were not together in any one of those places. And so each of these things have some of the people who are capable of choosing a new emperor, but they don't have all of them. And so each of these states, Epirus, Nicaea, and Trebizond, they are Roman states, no doubt, but they're successor states because each of them has only a partial claim on the elements that confer legitimacy on their rulers. And each of them was very, very aggressive in emphasizing that they have legitimacy and not the other two. And so this idea of contesting legitimacy shows that in essence, what you have is a Roman state that is now splintered. And those splinters remain Roman, but they are not the same thing as that original Roman state. They are different Roman states. They are Roman. And if we were to write a history of the Roman people, these would absolutely be a part of that history. But they are not the same state that was there before 1204. Okay, so what do we have to look forward to? So I'll answer some more questions as they come up in the course of talking about and presenting about this book. But I'm also going to be doing some things that reflect material that I think is actually super cool, but didn't make it into the book. And so this fall, I'm going to be posting a set of videos that, for those of you who are Gen X or older, you'll know what a B-side or an outtake is. So these are going to be the B-sides from the book. If the book is the album, this is going to be, the cool stuff in the studio that got left in the cutting floor. Some of this will be stuff that I couldn't fit in the book because the book, is already quite long, and honestly, it couldn't be bound if I kept everything I wanted into it. But others are going to be experiments where I'm going to play around with material that I collected just for my own research purposes and try to present it in a way that I think will be interesting to you. But all of them are going to be fun. I hope so. I think so. I believe so. They're going to be fun for me. I hope they're going to be fun for you. And also, again, I just want to re-emphasize, I hope that you take advantage of the discount and get a copy of the book. I think you'll really like it. It gives you a different view of Roman history from anything that's out there now. And I think it's really exciting to think about the world we live in with particular attention to the world that Romans created. We can learn a lot, and I think it also gives us a way to appreciate the unique and really remarkable things that Roman society was able to create. So again, the promo code Romans20, valid through October 7th, and you can get 20% off the book at basicbooks.com. And I look forward to talking more about Roman stuff in the very near future. Take care, everybody.